Hey guys, it's Brindley Tucker. And some of you may have seen my post earlier today, and some of you are probably looking at this going, what is she up to now? What is she doing? Why does she have that crazy thing on her head? And it was funny because I went back and forth today. I've been in a hat most of the day. Shout out to Ben Kenny Training for the awesome camo hat that kept me pretty normal in public today. And I was like, or should I just put it out there? And tonight's topic for Breakthrough with Brindley is fear and faith, and choosing faith over fear. And I thought, well, what a better way to segue into it than to talk about kind of what's going on. So this is the pack. So just so that you know, I don't just normally wrap my head in an ACE bandage to get attention. I am having a 24-hour EEG done on my brain. So inside this little pack, you can kind of see it, is the little thingy that I have to carry around. And I have all these wires in my head, and I have to do it for 24 hours. So they monitor everything that I do for 24 hours. So why? Why do I have this on my head? Well, 8 years ago, when I decided to make some changes in my life, I, as most of you know, decided to make some big decisions and get sober in May of 2012. Well, in June of 2012, I had my first grand mal seizure on a bus traveling because I couldn't drive. So I was riding the bus, public transportation everywhere. And there's nothing scarier than waking up in a hospital and finding out that you had a grand mal seizure on public transportation, especially having never really taken public transportation outside of the subway of New York City. And let me just tell you that public transportation in St. Pete, Florida is not the same as it is in Manhattan. So that was the first one, and they treated it, as an isolated incident. This is what happens. And it was terrifying. It was really scary. And there were so many fears at that time in my life. I was facing 15 years in prison. I was facing about $40,000 in fines. I had left the person that I had been living with that was supporting me. So I always say I had a house, but I didn't have a home. Had to move back in with my mom at 32 years old. I didn't have a car. I had to ride a bike. I lost my job. There were all of these things that were terrifying, that I was in fear every day. I didn't know how I was going to change my life, how I was going to get back up on my feet, how I was going to ever find work again, who would ever want to hire me after all the horrible things that I had done. And when they found out who I was, and now I'm having seizures on buses. And they treat the first one like an isolated incident. And 3 months later, I had my second one. And that's when we found out that I had adult onset epilepsy. And so I was diagnosed with epilepsy at 32, the same year that I got sober. And I've been very fortunate that it's under control and I take medication. And as long as I don't drink a lot of caffeine, get a lot of sleep, and stay away from stress, I am all good. So those of you that are in real estate know that those three things are pretty much what fuel us: is stress, lack of sleep, and caffeine. So I have to work really hard on my health. And so as we talk about tonight's topic, I was really thinking about it, and then God always has a purpose and always has a plan in mind, because faith has been something that has been a journey for me. And what I have found in my life is that I can't be in fear and faith at the same time. And I wrote some notes, as I always do, for tonight's talk. And, there's a lot of acronyms that go along with fear. Now, so that we can stay child appropriate, I'm not going to use some of the language that some of those acronyms have. I'm going to go with the PG version, but some of them are: forget everything and run, false evidence appearing real, or you can face everything and rise. And I always go to forget everything and run, because when I'm in fear, it's for two reasons. Most of the time, I'm either in fear of losing something that I have, or I'm in fear of not getting what I want. And so once I can identify what it is that I'm afraid of losing, or what it is I'm afraid of not getting, I can typically get from fear to faith pretty quickly. Yet I have to pause and I have to ask myself, and I have to face the fear in order to find out the source of it. So I have to first face it. So here's the last acronym. Number one, face it. Ask myself, what is it that I'm afraid of? Why am I afraid of it? What's triggering me to be afraid of it? And then I have to explore that. I have to ask myself, What am I going to lose by not getting this? What is at stake? What am I truly afraid of? And I have to explore and get to the root of where that fear is coming from, because typically it's usually not what we think it is on the surface. It's a much deeper trigger that's causing us to go into the fear. Again, we can always most likely take it back to a fear of not getting something that we want or losing something that we have. And we have to identify what either one of those items are. So we explore it and then we accept it, right? We have to get into acceptance around it. And the way that I get into acceptance is I ask myself some pretty, direct questions. Number one, what's the worst that can happen? And I'll go with something pretty drastic. When you're facing 15 years in prison and you know that your fate is in the life of one man, of a judge, you have to ask yourself those questions. And so I truly had to get right with myself and say, okay, what happens? What happens if I go to jail for 15 years? What happens if I can't pay those $40,000 back? What happens if I lose my house? And most of the time when I sit back and I ask myself and I really put it into perspective, I figure out that I'm going to manage. It may not be the way I want to manage. It may not be the ideal situation. Yet if I really stop and pause and ask myself, okay, so what's the worst that could happen? Okay, and what will we do if that happens? Great. Well, you'll be the best person that you can be in jail so that you can get out as quickly as you can, because you have to pay the consequences for your actions, right? How are you going to pay it? Well, you'll get a job and you'll live underneath your means. And if you have to save $20 a week to pay it off, you pay it off because you have to face the consequences of your actions. And nowadays, today, a lot of my fear is health. It's life, right? When I really put things into perspective, the worst thing that can happen is not being here tomorrow. And really, every other fear in the world doesn't matter when you're not guaranteed a single minute. And so it just depends on how deep you need to go. But by asking those probing questions, it can help you get into acceptance around your fear. And once you really confront what the fear could actually cause, the worst case scenario, then you can start to dial it back and chunk it back up to say, okay, that's the worst. What's the likelihood of that happening? Okay, well, compared to that, if this is the more realistic outcome, what are we going to do if that happens? And now you're starting to bring logic back into it, which allows you to get into faith a lot faster. Emotion is what's going to keep you in fear. Your emotions will keep you in your fear. Your logic will help get you back towards faith. Also asking yourself, how is it serving you? How is it serving those around you? A lot of times we don't take the time, especially my friends that are parents, and I talk about this a lot. And I'll ask them, how is this fear showing up for your children? What are you manifesting or programming inside of them by you being deep into this fear? And a lot of times it's just because they're not talking about it. We're not talking about our fears. We're not talking about, like, the fact that I'm on Facebook Live with a year ago, I would have never done this. I would have been in too much fear of what you were going to say about me. Yet by being honest and vulnerable, and in the last year talking out loud and saying, hey, yeah, I have a problem. I care a lot about what people think about me, and I make a lot of my decisions based on that, and I need help to not do that anymore. And by getting honest and talking about it and confronting the fear, I've gotten into acceptance around it. And now I can do other things to combat it, for it not to happen anymore, and to get into faith that, yeah, I'm sure there's going to be some people that are going to go, there's that crazy Brindley again, and blah, 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 blah. And then there's going to be people that are like, wow, she really changed my life. And she really, the fact that she could do that shows that I can do it. And those are really the ones that matter. And that's what's going to get me into faith. I have faith today that if one life is changed, who cares about all the negativity? My friend Ben Kenny just started a podcast called Win, Make, Give. And he talked on one of his first episodes about the fact that he realized that all of the negativity and the fear and all of these things that he was consuming himself with is what was actually causing him to be in a very negative mindset. And so he made a decision one day to just not be surrounded by that anymore, and to not be owned by that anymore. And so we have to face our fears, and we have to get into acceptance around them and confront them in order to overcome them. It's when I think of faith, I have to ask myself, do I stop breathing just because I can't see the air that's keeping me alive? Do I not trust it and therefore I stop it? No, I just continue to breathe because I know that the air is going to be there to keep me alive. And lately, I've been in some fear, and I've really had to get into faith around a lot of things that have been consuming me, things that have been putting me in a negative headspace. And I have to talk to myself. A lot of you have heard me say that I'm not responsible for my first thought, but I am responsible for my second thought. My first thought can put me in fear. I have an opportunity to make my second thought put me into faith. And sometimes it's as simple as making my second thought tell my first thought, I'm not going to fear. God, I have faith, and I'm handing this over to you. And what's been coming up a lot lately, I'm doing a leadership devotional through YouVersion. If you'd like to join the next one, direct message me and we'll get you added. But there's 120 of us that are in leadership that are doing a daily devotional together. And it was ironic that yesterday morning at Sunday school, the theme was to wait. And the devotional yesterday was to wait. And typically when I need to get into faith, the hardest thing for me is that I have to wait. Faith requires me to wait. And it's much more comfortable and it's much more easy for me to sit in my fear and sit in emotion and cry about it and talk about it and tell the whole world about it than to just sit and wait and know that everything is working out the way that it's supposed to be. And that I just have to have the faith that it's all going to work out and it's all going to be exactly what it's supposed to be. I always say that fear is like a big F you to God. When we're choosing to sit in fear, we're basically saying, F you, we don't think you can handle it, and I know better. And so again, instead of forgetting everything and run and making that your acronym, make this your acronym for fear. F, face it. E, explore it. A, accept it. And R, rise above it. And if you'd like to share your fears with me, you can private message me. You can text me at 727-512-9098. I'd love to help work through some of those fears with you. I know that there's not a whole lot that I'm afraid of today. I do have moments where my selfishness comes through and I'm going to lose something that I, have, or I'm not going to get something I want. Yet today, for the most part, I am in faith around some really big decisions in my life. And that was only by the work that I've done to get out of fear and to get into faith. So just remember, you can't be in fear and faith at the same time. And you can teach your second thought to tell your first thought that we're not going to be in fear anymore, that we're going to have thoughts of faith. We're going to have thoughts of positivity and moving forward. And that fear is just something that holds us back from being the best, truest version of ourselves. So I hope this was helpful. If not, let me know. And I love feedback. Feedback is the breakfast of champions. If there's anything that you think I can do to make these better for you, or if you have topics, private message me or text me. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Bye.